And you've just heard Lapwing featuring Joe Mango and Ayrshire. And I'm joined now by Phil and Tim, who are Lapwing. Hello, both.
Hi, Arthur. Nice to see you.
Now, we should have sorted before we spoke who's going to answer the first question since there's the two of you, but who can tell us or who would like to tell us about the track Ayrshire that we've just heard?
Phil. Well, I suppose like all of the songs on the album that we're putting out this summer, all of the songs began as just as a lyric, as a poem, really. That's the way we have always worked. Where I will kind of write a lyric and then send it over to Tim, and then Tim will do his magic and put some amazing music to it. So that's exactly how this one started. But it's interesting because Ayrshire was actually the very first one that was written on the whole album. In fact, it was written before we even had an album in our thinking, and it was actually even written before Lapwing existed. It was something that I wrote years and years ago, and had always just kind of like stayed with me. And then it was probably a few months into the writing of the album that it suddenly came back to me, and I thought, gosh, I think this would be perfect for what we're doing, and sent it to Tim, and he agreed, and then he did his magic. So yeah, it's the oldest song on the album.
Oh, that's really interesting. And we'll talk about how you work, because that kind of delineation, of kind of roles is quite rare, I think. But first, I'd like to ask you how Joe Mango got involved, because personally, I'm a big Joe Mango fan. She's been on the Scots Whay Hae podcast in the past. So how did Joe become involved?
I've known Joe for quite a few years. I remember I probably first bumped into her Nice and Sleazy's open mic, like, I don't know, a long time ago, many years. And we've kind of been friends over the years. And I remember when I was with Pungs, my band, we did a remix of one of our songs, me and Wesley from the Great Albatross at the time. And so we've done a few things together, and I had written this song and I sang it, and it just never felt right to me. I always thought me and Phil both have different ideas of what the songs are always about, even though he writes the lyrics. And I just always really felt it should be sung by like a female voice. I kind of thought of it as like a lullaby almost, and so yeah, I got in touch with Jo, and she was happy to sing it, and she sent back some amazing vocals. So,
and Phil, that's interesting, perhaps for you, since it's a song that you've been carrying with you for such a long time. Was this? Were you happy to kind of record it in this way?
Absolutely. I think the thing is that Tim and I are old friends, and I think it's always exciting, that moment when you feel like you've finished something and it's good enough to share, and then I send it over to Tim. It's just such an exciting moment when it comes through, and you can see what idea he's seen in it, really. And I think that's the kind of glory of a partnership, that he sees things in it that I don't. And there are definitely times where we disagree. I think we're close enough that we can argue and still be friends. It's kind of almost like a couple of brothers, squabbling at times. But we always get there, and I think it's just better because of it. I think the music that we have produced, there's just no way I could have done this on my own. Not even close. Tim can do things musically that I couldn't get anywhere near, and I think I really massively appreciate what he's able to bring to these songs. So no, I'm always excited to see. I mean, definitely there have been times where I've said no, but generally speaking, it's interesting and exciting in ways that I hadn't imagined, and that's a really good thing.
And Tim, can you tell us how you did come to work together? What's the story behind Lapwing?
Well, like Phil says, we've been friends for a long time, and we've always liked music. We've always had lots of fires and whiskey nights together, talking about music. And then we went, I think the key moment was actually we both went to a Fleet Foxes gig at the bandstand.
Mm-hmm.
And we're both big Fleet Foxes fans. And Phil came away from it and was just like, I can't remember what he said. He'd probably remember better than me, but it was something like, let's make an album, or let's write some songs, or let's try and do something together. I think he already had some ideas for kind of lyrics, and I've never enjoyed writing lyrics really. I've been involved in various music things, and it's always the part that I struggle with the most. So it was the first time I'd just been given lyrics and he sent over a few weeks later, I think, after he sent the lyrics to Luskentire. That was the first song. And I was just reading these lyrics, and instantly this like tune came to my head, and I played it on the guitar and sent it back to him, and he was like, that sounds great. And that was one of the few songs where actually it was the thing that I made was instantly accepted, and we both got really excited about it. Like you said, I think Ayrshire was like that as well. It was the first thing that came to my head was really good, and then other times it's gone through quite a few different tunes to get to something that we both actually like, or like ideas and stuff. So yeah, that was how it started. I don't know how long that ago. It was almost 6 years ago, probably, when the Fleet Foxes played, and so it's been a long time coming.
And you mentioned this is both tracks, and we're going to hear Luskentire later on, are taken from an album which is coming out in the summer. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We're not totally sure of the release date. We're still talking about that, but yeah, it'll be sometime, broadly speaking, in the summer.
Well, Phil, what can you tell us about the album? Because there's a theme which runs through it. You can see that straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's called Thin Places, which is an old kind of Celtic, maybe ancient Christian, maybe pre-Christian idea, but certainly a very old, very ancient idea that there are certain locations in the world where it's almost as if you can kind of the kind of boundary between heaven and earth, or something like that, or this world and the next, however you want to describe it, is stretched thin, and you can kind of stumble into a place like that and almost kind of have a sublime experience, or sense, something greater than yourself. And I think, when you grow up in Scotland, I think we almost become, you're almost spoilt by the kind of beauty of the landscape. You can easily forget that not every country in the world is like this, and it is just an amazingly beautiful place. And I think many people can kind of testify to some kind of experience they've had in their life where they've been out on a hill, or they've just caught a beach on the west coast at the right moment when it's beautiful and there's nobody there, and they've just felt something, it's resonated somehow within them, so that kind of idea really has inspired the whole album. And so there are 10 songs. They're all named after places in Scotland, and they're all really, I suppose, little short stories about people. They're not necessarily things that I've personally experienced, although there's some of them are related to my own experiences, obviously, but they're more like short stories about things happening in these places that kind of stir that kind of longing, I suppose, which is a kind of very human emotion, a kind of longing for something more than this.
Absolutely. And I'm not a musician, so I can kind of understand how you can write about places in that way that you're describing, almost poetically and all those things. But Tim, how do you go about turning that into music? Is it just from the lyrics, or is it from your own sense of the space and the place that you're writing about?
Yeah, it is. It's both. Like I read his poems, and I read the story, and I read it a few times, and it'll like when you read any poem, almost, it has like a kind of vibe, it has an atmosphere to it. It's not just words, but actually a feeling associates with it. It might be like a lonely feeling or a cold feeling or a mystical feeling, whatever it is. And I try and sort of get inside it and feel like, what does it actually feel like, and how does this actually express itself musically? And then we both did have a chat at the beginning about the overall sound. Like Phil, he's not as involved in, you know, actually putting down musical parts, but he's very involved in, I'd say, the production side of it and actually getting to the right sound. And often I go off on big tangents that isn't the right sound, and then he'll bring it back. And sometimes I'll bring in stuff that he didn't expect and that he thinks is really perfect. So we had a sort of chat about what actually the palette of sound should be, you know, like this kind of acoustic, but with these sort of eerie synths and guitars. It's a sort of haunting album, really. It's not often this idea of thin places, I think, in the album comes not through necessarily moments of ecstasy, but more like actually through through quite difficult circumstances and through suffering and through sort of tragic stories in some ways. Like a few of the songs that are coming out really are quite sad, and I really love them. He's written some really long verses that are just kind of long stories, and we've put out the kind of shorter songs that are more single friendly, as it were. But we've got these like long songs come in, and the last one has like a huge instrumental, and he kind of said, I think it should have this big instrumental, and then I just kind of imagined the story and imagined what actually going through that experience would sound like, and tried to put it to music. But I kind of get it. I remember my mum got me this poetry book a few Christmases ago for my Christmas present, and I had a similar thing. Now that I've started doing this, almost every time I read a poem, I actually start to hear it, and I start to hear like these sounds, and I start to think, oh, that's what it kind of feels like, and like almost like a movie. If you were thinking, what would this actually look like in a movie, and what would the soundtrack behind it be? So yeah, I think you hear that in Ayrshire, especially like the end of Ayrshire. It kind of has this cinematic feel, like it feels like a sort of soundtrack. And I've definitely, I don't know. I think a different musician would probably have a totally different take on it, but that's at least what I feel it should sound like.
The main thing I take from that is that Tim's now got into poetry, so I feel like my work. You know what I mean? I've succeeded, but I think he's right. Something that he said, like the Scottish landscape has this amazing quality that I think comes out in a lot of kind of Scottish art or Celtic art. Like it's simultaneously beautiful and also brutal. It's if you catch it at the right moment, it's this kind of transcendent experience because of its just astonishing beauty. But there are also moments where you think, gosh, if this goes wrong, it could kill me. And I think that kind of strain of kind of beauty and brutality comes through in so much of kind of Scottish art down the centuries. And I think in a very small way, we were just kind of trying to contribute a little bit to that theme that runs through the years, I think.
Yeah, I think that does appear in a lot of Scottish art and literature and all these things, that idea that look at this beauty. And then the other thing is, but we'll pay for it later. There's a day, something's gonna. So we can't just live in this all the time. And there is that kind of dichotomy at work, which I think is really interesting. It almost sounds like a kind of soundtrack to Scotland, or a love letter to Scotland. Is that a good way of describing it?
Yeah, very much so. Like I think Scotland's been my home my whole life, and I love it dearly. And I think I just think the connection with the landscape it's just a very real thing, and maybe the older I get, the more I feel it. When you manage to get out of the city, and into the coast somewhere, you just it's a kind of magical experience. So yeah, very much so, very much so. Very proud of the country.
And how did you choose the places then? How did you, that must have been, is there a kind of huge double album or triple album version of lots of other?
Well, there's not. I mean, it took us long enough to finish the 10 songs, but I mean, we definitely have other ideas that could develop over time. I guess. Yeah, I mean, some of them are very, very personal. So there's a song, the second song that we released from the album was a song called Cames Bay. There are lots of Cames Bays in Scotland, but the one I'm writing about is actually one in Millport. And I went there all the time as a kid. My aunt has a little flat in Millport, so I went there for my summer holidays, and it was just a place of complete freedom when you were, kind of a 10-year-old boy. You just got to leave the house in the morning, come back for your lunch, and then come back at dark, and that was it. And that a song tells the story of kind of metal detecting in the woods and finding a little silver bracelet, and that is 100% true. That song is exactly what happened to me. So some of them are very personal, and so it felt very natural to write about them. And some of them are just, they're just really, special places, resonant places, that just fitted the mood that we were trying to capture.
And Tim, you mentioned that you started to have this idea of a soundtrack in your head. So we know that there's a theme in terms of Scottish places. Did you start to think there's a theme in terms of the music that's kind of encapsulates the whole? So the album is like a whole rather than individual tracks.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's actually been one of the things that I've struggled with in past musical projects is keeping an album. I get too excited by the last live show that I see, and all of a sudden my music starts to sound like whoever I watched last. I find it hard to do a whole album that's just one genre, and it can be a strength because I can make a lot of different types of music, but it's also a sort of weakness when you're trying to make one piece of art that really holds together. Whereas with this, I think because it had such a theme lyrically, and because there is a lot of similarities in the poems, they're not, you can all tell that they're in the same sort of, I don't know, they're written by the same person, and they're in the same kind of, they're all the same idea. It made it much easier to actually keep the same kind of sound throughout it. That develops, but there's certain sounds that come back in different songs that you would hear, and it would remind you of another part of the song and stuff like that. And then I think it all sort of comes together in the last song, which is a big, long, huge sonic explosion kind of thing. Where we
Phil, you mentioned that you write the lyrics almost as poems to begin with. Do you always view that they're going to be lyrics? Or the reason I'm asking this is I've just read a book with the lyrics of Alistair Roberts in them. He's released the book of lyrics, and I wondered, did you ever think, well, these would be poems, perhaps as well as songs?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wanted them to be both. Really, I think that I'm a great reader, and I love poetry, and so it's like just a kind of personal interest I have generally. And I wanted to write things that could stand alone and be read on their own terms. And I think, so I kind of see them almost as two separate things. There's the poem version almost, and then there's the song version. And I think that's okay. I think that Tim has to some extent put a kind of interpretation on each of the poems, and whenever you do that, you kind of, to some extent, you're kind of narrowing the possibilities of what it could be to make it a thing. And I think that's definitely right and good. But at the same time, if you just picked them up and read them, they could be something else, and they could mean something else to you. And I think that's okay too. So I was definitely writing knowing that they were going to be lyrics, but definitely wanting them to be able to be read independently and still have a meaning. I think sometimes lyrics to songs can almost, as soon as you take the music away, they can either be so obscure that it's hard to know what to make of them, or suddenly they can sound, you know, at times maybe a little bit trite, you know, when they're divorced from the music. And I'm desperately hoping that that's not the case with this. That certainly was my intention, desperately trying to kind of make them be able to live independently, if possible.
And are there plans to play live gigs, maybe to accompany the album release? You've got a smile on your face, Phil.
I've got a smile on my face because that's mainly going to be up to Tim.
Yeah. Well, it's still undecided, I think. I know Phil would like to like to see it played live, and it would be nice. I think in some form, like it'll, yeah. At least some of it will in some form be performed live, but whether that's like the full band as it is on the album, yeah, sort of undecided. It's quite a big undertaking to make it happen, but we think that I'd love to. I would love to. It would be an exciting thing to do.
I mean, it all depends on the demand, Alistair. You know, once we sold our millionth copy, I mean, the demand would just be so great.
Yeah, you're supporting Taylor Swift next time she comes around.
Exactly. We were standing by the phone waiting for the call. It just never came. I don't know what happened.
Listen, it sounds to me it's got Celtic connections, you know, special night written all over it. But yeah, I guess if you're listening to anyone at Celtic Connections, surely this is perfect for you.
Exactly.
Guys, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And from what I've heard so far, the album, you know, is going to be fantastic.
Well, listen, really appreciate your time, and thanks so much for having us on and supporting us. It means a lot to us.
It's an absolute pleasure. And this is Lapwing and Luskin Tyre.